inviting me. Since we've been talking about colonization and decolonization, I need to start with a remark, if I can find it. So maybe all of you know, this is the tiny country that I come from. It's somewhere in the corner of Europe. It's very small, and it has had the, well, let's say the arrogance to dominate the country where I am now for centuries. And I must say that when we talk about decolonization, I really always feel very grateful that I'm able to come to Indonesia and to have an open dialogue. And I really think that's one of the big merits of Indonesia, that it has us here, the Dutch people who inflicted so much damage to Indonesia, who were so disrespectful of the richness of the culture of Indonesia, that you invite me back and that we can have this open dialogue. So I'm really grateful to be here. And that also, linking to what Daryl was saying, I was wondering a bit this morning why you would specifically listen to experiences from the Netherlands in teaching medical ethics. And that's not about because we know how to do it. So it's not about colonization in the sense that Daryl used, where we can put our ideas about education and tell you how to do it. So I think what I really like to do here, why I like to speak about it here, is because we can exchange ideas about how you can do it. Because we're all we're all experimenting, and we're all trying to do our best in teaching young doctors how to deal with ethical issues and how to behave ethically. But I don't have the truth, as many Dutch thought when they were here in the past centuries. But I think we all try different ways to teach. And what I want to share with you in the next, let's say, half hour is how we try to teach medical students in bioethics, the humanities, and clinical ethics in our medical curriculum. And what I'd like to do is, at the end, so I'll warn you, I'd like to discuss a few cases that students bring up in our teaching. And I'd like you to think about these cases at the end. So I'd really like to have some response from you about the cases that our students in Amsterdam bring up sometimes. But before that, I'm going to so these are we have eight medical schools in Holland, and they're somewhere. Well, I won't indicate. There are two in Amsterdam, and then most cities have just one medical school. I think there are 200 medical schools in Indonesia. That's not true. You have 200 medical schools. I think.
So what? I'll put my name on the side.
So then you see how tiny this country is. So you have. Let's say 20, but maybe 30 times as many medical schools as we have. So I really feel modest when I start talking about how we do it. So, what I want to speak about with you is the two phases in our medical curriculum where we do ethics and humanities teaching. So I want to speak about first about the bachelor curriculum, and then about the master curriculum, which is the phase of the internships. And what we're doing and developing in the bachelor curriculum. And as I already indicated here, in the bachelor curriculum, the focus is very much on bioethics and the humanities. And the humanities for us involve philosophy and history, mainly added to bioethics. Maybe anthropology to some extent as well. So I think the first question that we should ask, if we talk about humanities and ethics training, is: will it make students better doctors? And that's the basic idea. We have the idea that by doing this teaching, we improve their way of being doctors. And in fact, it's one of the challenges that are always raised in medical faculties, that we that we have to show them that they become better doctors. This is not asked from neurology professors or from pediatrics professors, but bioethics professors always have to show, or have to make it plausible that they become better doctors. So what Utrecht University has put in is in a sort of a declaration of their bioethics curriculum, is that we will try to make you a better doctor because thanks to humanities education, you will better understand the human condition. You will have knowledge that is complementary to biomedical knowledge. And I will speak a little bit about evidence-based medicine as one of the things that we have to relate to. And you will better understand diversity and cultural and social differences. And students will better understand what their responsibilities towards patients are. So these are in fact the four promises that we think we need to be able to fulfill when we teach bioethics and humanities to students, and this is shared by all Dutch universities. I'd like to show you a quote from the important clinical epidemiologist Alvin Feinstein. I think he's passed away a long time ago. But what he says, and he was a hardcore science guy, and what he says is that we need, as doctors, we don't only need science, but he says that without intuition and imagination, I think imagination is one of the core things that we have to try to develop in students and in ourselves to become good doctors. And he says that without intuition, imagination, and aesthetics may sound strange to you, but he said that aesthetics is a large part of it. The scientist is a dull person. He has no idea at all. He's confined to his own ideas. But on the other hand, he says, without rationality, without discipline, and without logic, the artistic doctor is a dogma, so he's just talking nonsense. So we need both intuition, imagination. So we need the humanities, and we need science. And that comes from someone who was a hard scientist. So this is what he was really talking about intuition, about developing and refining feelings that you have, maybe gut feelings that you have. He was talking about imagination, about creativity, about understanding other people, and about different perspectives and practices. And he was talking about ethics and aesthetics. He was talking about issues that we've been talking about dignity, a hugely complex concept. That's what it is about accepting people, about coherence, and about sensitivity to other people. So let me talk about the bachelor phase briefly, and then to the master phase, and then I have a few cases that you might want to think about with me. So in the bachelor phase, we have a focus on bioethics and humanities, and that has been defined by a framework that is agreed upon by all medical schools in Holland. So, and that's called the Framework 2009, and we're going to renovate it for undergraduate medical education. And in the field of bioethics and humanities, it has these 5 fields that all medical schools in Holland feel doctors have to know something about them. And that's the general foundations of bioethics, the philosophical context of medicine, and I'll say a little bit more about each later on. The distinction between scientific and what's called non-scientific knowledge, but which is, as Daryl also said, which are also systems of knowledge, even though they don't conform to the standard idea of scientific knowledge. And it's done 5, but there are 4. There's basic knowledge of the history of medicine and medical science. So history is one of the things that can be very important in medical school. I feel personally that in many medical schools it is a neglected subject, whereas it is very important for students to reframe their way of thinking if they look at the history of medicine. Just to show you, just for one example, it's always very interesting for students to hear that in Western Europe, the circulation of the blood is a recent idea. It has been there for only 3 centuries, whereas for about 20 centuries, doctors have worked from the idea that the blood, there's an ebb and flood in the blood. So the blood goes like this in the body. We only know for 3 centuries that it goes this way. So the circulation of the blood that we find completely self-evident is a recent historical idea. And to show students that opens their eyes for different ways of looking at the body in their head. So this is the framework. And so what the general foundations of bioethics are issues like dealing with scarcity, dealing with important dilemmas such as end-of-life dilemmas, such as also beginning-of-life dilemmas. It is about innovations in medicine such as gene therapy, organ transplantation. And it is, and I think that's a very important subject in modern medicine, it is about the desirability but also the undesirability of implementing all the increasing technological possibilities that exist. So these are the issues that we try to cover in most Dutch universities on the general foundations of bioethics. So that's the first part of it. And then the philosophical context. I'm both a physician and a philosopher, so I really like this part of the humanities teaching. And I think it has 4 specified aims that are specified in the framework that I spoke about. It is talking about the individual as a subject that gives meaning to what happens to that subject. So you have to look at patients not as inert material that have a disease, but they're always giving meaning to what they're experiencing. So that is the first thing. You have to realize that every patient who comes in front of you has his or her own meaning of what is happening to them. The next one is that there are a lot of individual differences in lived experiences and in disease-related practices, the way people deal with disease. It's also about causality, about philosophical subjects like what is the cause of disease, how you can diagnose it, and what prevention is about. And it's about basic concepts such as autonomy and identity, and also about the concept of the person. And that, I think, is a subject that gets increasingly important, where we have an increasing amount of older people who may lose certain elements of the person that they were before. You know, one of the great epidemics in Western Europe now is Alzheimer's disease, where people tend to lose part of their personal characteristics. So the concept of a person becomes more and more important. Then the distinction between scientific and non-scientific knowledge. So what we try to teach students is the basics of philosophy and sociology of science. So where does science come from? What are the choices that scientists make in their work? The distinction between quantitative and qualitative forms of science. As you will probably know, the dominant form of scientific rationality in medical schools is quantitative in nature. I mean, the randomized controlled trial is still the epitome is still what science is about. Well, I think there are very important qualitative forms of science that we also have to teach our students about. And then foundations of therapies, including what's called complementary medicine, so the herb therapies that Carol was talking about, and the way you can assess their effect. So that's about the scientific and non-scientific medicine. What we also have to, as I already told you, so we have to talk about the history of biological and psychological and social definitions of health and disease, but also crucial historical milestones. One of them is secularism, not of course, but also things like mechanistic concepts of the body and all kinds of advances. And what I think is an important issue is the concepts of health and disease and their historical roots. And as you may know, the WHO definition of disease as a state of complete well-being, of complete well-being, is under discussion now because it seems to be too broad to many people. So we're in a discussion about concepts of health and disease, and it's important to know the historical roots of the actual concept. So this is what we do in Amsterdam, where we have two medical schools that are in the process of merging. So we combine our curriculum more and more. And we have these 6 issues that we discuss. And we're also talking about medicine and literature because we feel that literature, novels but also films and theater are important sources of knowledge about how to deal with disease and about how people live with disease. So that's why we have an open access website with all kinds of disease and medicine related novels, poetry, and film that people may want to look at. This is a thing that may be a bit specific for the way we try to do things in Holland, especially at my university. We're now starting up a new bachelor program, and one of the things that we try to do is that we limit the amount of face-to-face lectures. So lecture halls with say 200 students where we talk about ethics. We feel that it's not really very effective because it doesn't encourage them to think for themselves. It doesn't really encourage their reflection. It looks like if they have to have a consumer attitude toward ethics. And ethics doesn't work with a consumer attitude. It has really to promote their reflection. So we limit the amount of lectures, and what we increasingly do is something called team-based learning. And that's based on the idea that health professionals, doctors and other health professionals, will increasingly work in teams. So you have to learn them to do that starting in the teaching period. So team-based learning is really the basic idea of the new bachelor that we're developing. And I'll show you a little bit more about what team-based learning is about. And then we have working groups, of course, practical exercises. And what we do in our field is the examinations that we do, and we've been talking about examination yesterday, is almost entirely portfolio-based. So they have to describe their development in a portfolio that lasts over the whole period of the bachelor period. So we recently, about a month ago, I did a team-based learning session on prenatal screening for Down syndrome and ethical issues related to that. And team-based learning typically starts with an individual test, which tests the extent of knowledge of a student of both screening programs, what screening is about, and also the ethics of screening. So they have to, that's a typical, let's say, multiple choice exam that they have to fill in prior to starting the team-based learning session. Because it's not an exam in the formal sense, but it is intended to see if they're ready for team-based learning. If they have the intellectual baggage needed to start the team-based learning. And then what we then do is we give the team an assignment about a couple who hesitate about doing prenatal screening at the beginning of the pregnancy. Because some couples don't want it. And they may have ethical reasons not to want it. Because, for example, they may be opposed to abortion. Or they may feel that screening for Down syndrome is discriminating towards people with Down syndrome, which is also an important reason sometimes for people not to do it. So they have that assignment, a story about the couple that is hesitant, that comes to see their doctor to discuss that issue. and the values behind it. And then the team discusses for about an hour about the case. And they try to reach a shared solution. And then afterwards as a team, they will do the same assessment as before. And then hopefully their way of dealing with the problem will have improved. And that's what's called the T-RED, the Individual Readiness Assurance Test. There's an I-RED, and then you have the T-RED at the end. And one part of team-based learning, which is an essential element, is that they assess each other as well. So it's not only, and I think that's really a crucial, innovative thing in team-based learning, is that students assess each other's contribution to the process. And they assess the professionality of the other students. And that's, I think, an element that we don't use enough yet in medical teaching. Because students have a very good idea about what professional behavior as a student is. And so having them assess each other is one of the ways in which you can improve professionality in team function. So this is what we are now doing. I think I'm going to skip a few things. It's time, but I wanted to go to the master phase. Otherwise, you've been listening for 3 days to talk, so I'd really like to discuss a few cases with you if we can. It's not the best. We should be on tables and what. We'll try. So in the master phase, which is the phase of the internships, we have a different one. The focus is really on clinical ethics. So we don't discuss a lot of humanities and history. That's for the bachelor phase. But then in the master phase, we get to clinical ethics. So it's really case-based teaching, what we do there. And we have moral deliberation sessions according to the structured form of moral deliberation in sessions of maximum of 12 students. Often smaller groups, but 12 is the maximum. And what students need to do before, and that makes it resemble team-based learning, is that they have to provide a structured description of a case that they've seen in hospital, and that they've been involved in themselves, and that they had ethical questions about it. And one of the things that we also ask from students, is that they have at least 2 references from the literature about this type of ethical case. And that might be something that you would not, that works out very well. Because students usually think that ethics is about what is in your heart. It is about what is in your heart. But it's also about what is in the ethical literature. You're not the first one to be exposed to a case. Many people have thought about it before. So you have to use that common experience. And that common experience you can find in the literature. So you might even call it some form of evidence-based case discussion. So you use the evidence that is around. And so they need to study the literature about the case that they've seen. So what the structured case discussion that we use is the Utrecht scheme, but as I always say, any scheme is good. Almost any scheme is good. So you can do it differently as long as you structure the discussion and don't let them free flow discussion. The first step in that scheme is that they present a case. So they present a patient, and I'll show you how they do that. They present a case. And the next question, which is probably really the most important issue in all discussions that we have with students, is that they have to specify why they think it is an ethical problem. And I can't stress enough that I want to know why they think it's an ethical problem. It's not why I think it's an ethical problem, but it's why they think it's an ethical problem. Because they have to be helped to formulate the problem. So what's the dilemma they're confronted with? And I can help specify it, but it's their problem to begin with. So the next step is, what further facts do you need? What further facts does the group need to know to discuss the issue? Including social and legal facts, so that you know what you need to know about about the context of the patient. What do you need to know about health policy, and what do you need about health law to be able to discuss the case. Then the next step is that you discuss what values are involved. So what is the values involved? How do you weigh them? And that's really also what patient values are. So what's the values of the patient? And finally, what conclusion would you draw? So that's simply, this is a simplified version, but it's enough for this type of discussions. There's the original one has 10 steps, but, well, you don't need 10 steps, 5 is enough. And this is really helping us structure this. So what I'd like to show you is a few cases that they discussed with us. The first one was about a female patient of a century old. So she had a considerable age. But she was still quite energetic, living on her own, living her life as she wanted to live it. Quite autonomous, doing her own shopping. So this was really a very active, very old woman. And she was admitted to hospital because of an anemia of unknown origin. And after extensive investigation, she is diagnosed with leukemia. And then her daughter, who's always also present, and who's also an older woman, she's 75 years old. And she asked the doctor not to disclose this news to her mother because she thinks this will only have a negative effect on her vitality and on her energy. And she's so glad her mother, at this age, is still in good spirits. So that's the case that the students sent to us. Now I'd like to ask you, I don't know if anybody will stand up to tell me, but why is this an ethical problem? Why would this be an ethical problem? Could anyone maybe try to help why?
Is it the right of the mother?
Yeah, please go to the microphone because we want to hear you.
It is the right of the mother, regardless such a long ages, because he is still alert, energetic. So she has the right.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So the ethical problem is that she has the right to know about her diagnosis because she's still competent and vital. But and what we then try to ask the students is, where's the dilemma? If there's a right, there's also something against it. So the dilemma is probably somewhere between the right. Of course she has the right to know. But there's also a reason why the daughter asks the doctor not. Because the daughter tells us, I know that she has a right to know. But still, the quality of life is the other part. So what we try to do, and I think I really feel that that's the most important step in the whole scheme that we use, is where is the ethical, is it an ethical dilemma, and why is it an ethical dilemma? And the daughter here has a really genuine concern. She's really involved with her mother. And in fact, she wants to protect her mother from sadness and from grief. Because if her mother hears this, she knows that the end is near. And even though she's 100 years old, she wants to live on. She enjoys life. And so the daughter wants to protect her mother from grief, even though she also feels that she doesn't want to cheat on her. And the mother has a right to know. So in fact, that's often what the discussion is about. Why do you feel there's an ethical problem? And that's what students usually have a lot of difficulty about. And so then what we do is, once we've defined this type of ethical issue, so the dilemma between the right to know and quality of life, we get back to the other ones, which is what further facts do you need and which values are involved. So the value, it really is a value of autonomy and respect for self-determination on the one hand, and the value of a protected quality of life on the other hand. And so those are in fact maybe the two basic values included here. And how do you weigh them? What do you find most important? And then what you will see in the student group is that they will differ. There's one student who says the right to knowledge is the most important. So I will tell the mother even if the daughter doesn't want to tell me. And there will be other students who say, I would protect my grandmother against this kind of knowledge. So I feel that you shouldn't tell the mother. And then there are very smart students who say, I would ask the mother if she wants to know. And then I always say, you can do that, but by doing that, you tell the mother that there's something serious going on. So you already do what the daughter asks you not to do. So the smart solution is not working very well. So in fact, I have how many more minutes? Because I had another case that I did.
I think it's better if we can discuss.
Okay, right. Okay, good.
Invited some questions.
I just showed a case. I'm a bit disobedient. I just showed it. So that.
Thank you. Thank you, Dick, for the very exciting presentation. I would like to just put some keywords of your lectures. First, as you see, that is teaching ethical history, will teaching ethics and humanities will become the good doctor, right?
Right.
Actually, and you also stress that the importance of the ethical teachers instead of neurology, OBGYN. But I think we trying to bring our ethical teaching in those clinical settings, so that involve all the clinicians, specialists, seniors, to bring the ethics in their own setting. And I remember when Daryl came for the first time.
Your microphone is off again. Do you have a better microphone?
That workshop where we invite all the senior and so I think it's better to make it everything in all of the teachers, and so that become a role model for all the students, that all doctors should have touch with ethics and humanities. This is the first time. And you also emphasize the lack of historical issues in the medical teaching, right?
The lack of what?
History.
Yeah.
History.
Okay,
Is
yeah.
it the history of medical, of health, or teaching medical teaching? Because I learned from my grandfather, my father at that time that in Indonesia, the doctors' school, we have two kinds, right? But Prof. Tavio is very expert. The doctor Onkotu, right? This is the doctor's thoughts in Indonesian system, whereas the others are doctors taught in the Netherlands. But isn't it a pity that this is never being taught? I think this is a good history as well. That during that time, I hope I'm not insulted. Because I think student has the right to know the historical of our medical education. But it seems like historically not being touched at all. So how should we start? Because we are dealing with ethics and humanity. So that this is as a part of our medical education. And also it is a trend of evidence-based medicine, stress on evidence-based medicine, harder. But I am pleased to learn that actually by teaching ethics and humanity, So we always think of the patient reference, the medical field of clinical perspective, and also the evidence base. So become once all together. So that I think we should teach everything is embedded in this, not being taught by certain. This is, I think, I repeat it. So thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Yes, you say you have to integrate the humanities teaching and the bioethics teaching into the clinical teaching by inviting the doctors in and having them participate in the teaching.
Yeah, so it becomes theirs.
So it becomes theirs too. I fully agree with that, of course, and we do have teachings that we do in common with. I give lectures or small working groups together with pediatricians, for instance, and with neurologists as well, and oncologists as well. So I think that's the most important way to show to students that ethical issues are not something that you do somewhere outside the clinic, but that they're really at the heart of the clinical work. And so that's one thing. The problem is that what I address is that we, as from bioethics, we often have to justify more than others why our teaching is part of medicine and why students have to learn it. But I think, and in fact, my answer to your second question would be about the same. I think if you want to show that history is important, you should also integrate it into the clinical teaching. So if there's teaching about, for instance, infectious diseases, so there should be teaching also about how sanitation in the 19th century was the most important way to deal with diseases like cholera and diseases like tuberculosis. So instead of focusing immediately on the drugs that are available for TBC, you should also talk about how the main steps in the eradication of infectious diseases has been better housing.
I think we misunderstood. I didn't tell it appropriately. Actually, the history of the medical education from long time ago in Indonesia, because history of Indonesia during the colonization never been taught. So that my grandchildren, they don't know at all about that. So this is very important because in bioethics and this, it also shows the difference. And now we are exchange, we send our students to Europe very nicely on the other way around.
Right.
So that it should be also put in this history. Isn't that?
Yes. So you mean that students should know about the history of medical education
during the Dutch
during the Dutch colonial domination here in
because
Indonesia.
but in a very nice way, eloquent. I mean, so that not revenge thinking, but so that not conflict, but a kind of perspective.
Right. Thank you very much for that suggestion, because I think we could do it the other way around too. I think Dutch medical students should also know about what the Dutch doctors did and how they taught medicine to Indonesians, and how there was a colonial way of teaching medicine in Indonesia. Thank you very much for the suggestion. I think it's
so we can start and thinking in a very appropriate way. So
I absolutely agree.
But important to learn to study. Thank you.
Thank you.
Is there any other comment?
Thank you for the nice presentation, Professor Willems. So, like you said before, that one of your students said that bioethics is a matter of heart, and you said that we also need to collaborate with the common practical medical science. But in my opinion, when we talk about the bioethics and ethics, we need to build the sense of sympathy or no empathy. Yes, when we have a practical area when we contact the patients, and then how are your suggestions to build this sense of empathy when we are still teaching in the undergraduate time? But in fact, when they are already graduate, sometimes one or two doctor in the practical is far from the ethical area and far from the bioethical sense. And then how it still how we still make them have the sense of ethical, sense of bioethical in the continual time, not only by textual context, but also to build the sense of ethical, because we deal with human. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your question. I think what you point to is a really big challenge, because what we can do is during teaching we can try to give them some idea about how to deal with ethical issues and how they could be they could display empathy towards patients. But we don't know what happens once they're out in the clinic, and if it takes longer, they may lose all that kind of teaching because of all kinds of triggers to do different things. So I think I haven't mentioned it that way, but one of the best way, one of the things that we really need to try to do is to build this as a sort of a virtue to develop a virtue in students that will continue after their initial training, and that they will bring with them during their career as a professional. And that's probably the hardest part of the whole bioethics teaching. And I think there are two ways of trying to continue the teaching. One of them is that you don't stop after medical training. So we do give bioethics teaching, and we do have moral deliberations in the hospital with doctors who are already working as a doctor. So it has to continue. Just like medical knowledge has to be refreshed all the time, also empathy and training in ethics has to be refreshed all the time. That's, I think, the only answer that you have. So you have to continue. And you need the support of the clinicians around the students to have a continuous effect on students. But it's really the biggest challenge that we have. And in fact, to be honest, I'm not sure that we do have that long-lasting effect on students, even if they get into environments that are not very favorable to ethical behavior. We all know that some hospitals are not favorable to ethical behavior, and some of the financial triggers trigger people to act counter-ethical. So it's a challenge. And all we can do is continue the education. So there's a question in the back. If there might be somewhere circulated this up.
Hello, good morning. So I just wanted to ask is there a space for social science theories in the teaching of bioethics? And if there is space for it, how much accommodation should be given to it? Or should it not just be an accommodation, but more of a real inclusion of social science theories? Because based on what when I was doing my master's in bioethics, it's just about Hume, about Kant, but there's a lack of discussion about Urdu, about Freire, and such.
Could you just stay with the microphone, because what you were asking is how much Accommodation, you said?
Accommodation or inclusion. So if it is not just accommodation, how much inclusion should we give social science theories? Because I think
I understand.
bioethics is not just about man. So we keep on talking about man, the ontology of man and such, but man is not just separate being from others. Man is a social animal.
Right. Sure. No, yeah, of course. The question is how much, in fact, social science, anthropology, sociology should go into bioethics teaching. I think what we do is in the humanities section we do include anthropology mainly as a social science area. If you want to talk about the different meanings that people give to disease, you need social science approaches. So I think they're crucial to, if you want to have people understand diversity, for instance, there's crucial knowledge from social science that we need to use. And in fact, the research we're doing in ethics at our department is very much anthropological in nature. So it looks at the way in which people deal with their own ethical issues in an empirical way. So I'm very much in favor of using a lot of empirical studies, and I'm never teaching about human count, I must say. I don't think it helps medical students a lot to know a lot about Immanuel Kant, and it's not their field of study. So it's a lot more important for them to know about different ways people give meaning to disease, and that's anthropological studies, and a bit less about, let's say, the categorical imperative of Kant. So if that's an answer to your question, yeah.
Okay, once more, that is the last question.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you very much. I saw at your presentation you mentioned about intuition. I just would like to know how can we train this intuition to come up from our student or our student, while as far as I know, intuition is quite a spontaneous thing. Thank you.
That's really a really interesting question. Thank you for that. So how can we improve the intuition? Is that what you want to know? I think the only way to improve intuition is by doing it in groups. So have students tell their intuitions to each other. So, and in fact, intuition, I think, for doctors is a completely crucial thing. They have to, so because you may know that in clinical decisions, most doctors take clinical decisions in the first few seconds they see a patient. And that's completely intuitive. And I'm a family doctor. And we are taught as family doctors that the most important moment for a doctor who sees a patient are the first few seconds, in which you see whether there's something really serious going on that you need to send someone to the hospital with all kinds of speed, or whether it's something that you can take time for. And that is, I think, a form of intuition. So you don't really know what kind of knowledge you use. It's also sometimes called tacit knowledge. So it's the knowledge that we don't specify, we don't write it down. We can't write it down because it's very quick. So what we're doing is what we often do in these case deliberations is that we ask students to give their first idea. So don't think about it, just what's your first idea? And that's how you train intuition. So you let them give it. So without thinking, tell me immediately, or write it down on a piece of paper immediately. And you give them 10 seconds for that. So not half an hour, 10 seconds. And and then they compare their intuitions. And then you see that some of them are very advanced in this type of intuitive knowledge, and some of them have no idea what they have to write down. And then they learn from each other. And that's the way we try to train intuition. But it's a very good question because it's something that's completely neglected. We give them all kinds of statistics and complicated stuff and randomized trials. But the one thing they have to learn is what's their first intuitive reaction. And sometimes that intuitive reaction proves to be completely wrong at the end. But you need to know it in the beginning, because it's the starting point of a reflection. So it's the first idea. And as well, for the 100-year-old patient, some of the students have the complete intuitive reaction that she shouldn't know, because they would treat their grandmother that way. So they were, oh, don't tell her. And then you have to discuss it, and then sometimes you need to correct the intuition. So you have to be critical about your intuition. But it still is the first thing that you have. So that's the way we try to train intuition. But it's neglected. I think it needs more attention.
So, thank you very much, Professor Dick.
Thanks a lot.
Before we close the session, to that Professor Jujian have another responsibility. I would like to present